The stars stretched endlessly across the void, cold and indifferent. Amidst the silence of space, a weak, broken signal drifted, barely holding together as it traveled across the galaxy. Aboard the UES Sentinel, a massive human deep space exploration vessel, Lieutenant James Carter leaned forward, staring at the flickering holographic screen. The signal was old, decayed, but still transmitting. "Are you getting this?" Carter asked, adjusting his headset. Sergeant Riley, the ship's communications officer, frowned. "Barely. It's weak. Fragmented. I'll clean it up." Static buzzed, then a robotic voice translated the alien message. "Help us. Abandoned. Dying. Anyone." The bridge fell silent. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. "Source?" Captain Reynolds asked, stepping forward. Riley worked the console. "Coming from a system at the edge of the Orion Arm. Uncharted. No records of settlements there." Carter's jaw tightened. If no one's there, then who's sending the signal? A forgotten cry for help. The signal repeated, weaker this time. The words barely held together, as if the sender had long lost hope. Commander Vasquez, the ship's tactical officer, crossed his arms. "Could be a trap. Pirates, maybe." Reynolds considered it. "Or it's real. If it is, we may be their only chance." Carter turned back to the signal. Who were they? What happened to them? His instincts told him one thing. Whoever sent this had no other hope left. "Captain," he said, "I think we should go." Reynolds nodded, but her expression was grim. "Set course. But stay sharp. If the rest of the galaxy ignored this, there's a reason why." Approaching the unknown. The UES Sentinel leaped through space, its engines burning toward the dying world. The journey was short, but tension filled the air. Carter and his team gathered in the war room, staring at a holographic projection of their destination. A planet half covered in darkness, its atmosphere barely holding together. No signs of technology. No spaceports. Yet, something had survived. "This world is dying," Vasquez muttered. "Whatever's down there, it won't last much longer." Riley pulled up thermal scans. There's movement in one of the ruined cities. Weak life signs. Carter's stomach turned. Who abandoned them? And why? As the ship entered orbit, the last transmission came through. The voice was barely a whisper. "We are the last. Save us." The signal cut off completely. "Damn it," Carter muttered. Reynolds stood. "Gear up. We're going in." The unknown awaited. The UES Sentinel hovered in high orbit above the planet. From the bridge, Carter stared at the dying world below. The surface was covered in thick, dark clouds, with faint traces of red lightning flashing through the atmosphere. It looked dead, lifeless. But the scans told a different story. "Confirmed," Riley reported. "There are survivors down there, but barely." Captain Reynolds stood with her arms crossed. "Any idea what happened to this place?" Vasquez shook his head. "Radiation levels are high, atmosphere is thin, and there are signs of orbital bombardment. Someone tried to wipe this planet out." Carter clenched his fists. "Then why did no one come to help?" Reynolds exhaled. "All right, we go in. Carter, take your team. Find out what's left." The descent. The dropship Thunderclaw cut through the stormy skies, shaking violently as it fought against the turbulent winds. Inside, Carter and his squad braced themselves. "Stay sharp," Carter ordered. "If someone attacked these people, they could still be here." As they neared the surface, the view cleared. Below them lay the ruins of a once great city. Towering structures had collapsed, roads were torn apart, and a strange purple mist covered the ground. "This place is a graveyard," whispered Sergeant Blake. The dropship landed with a heavy thud. The back hatch opened, and Carter led his team out, weapons ready. The air was thick, toxic. Their helmets filtered out the worst of it, but the stench of death still lingered. Then, a sound. A weak cough echoed from the shadows of a ruined building. Carter raised his hand, signaling his squad to hold position. Slowly, he stepped forward, weapon lowered. "Hello," he called out. For a moment, silence. Then, from the darkness, they appeared. First contact. The creatures that emerged were thin, frail, their bodies covered in torn metallic-like robes. Their skin was pale blue, their eyes large and sunken, filled with exhaustion and fear. One of them, clearly the leader, stepped forward. His voice was weak, trembling. "You are not like the others." Carter removed his helmet, showing his human face. "We received your distress signal. We're here to help." The alien leader's eyes widened in shock. His people whispered among themselves. "You came." His voice cracked, as if he couldn't believe it. Carter frowned. "Who did this to you?" The alien looked at the sky, his expression full of pain and rage. "The ones who once called us allies." Carter's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an abandoned species. This was a betrayal, and whoever did it might still be watching. The wind howled through the ruined city, carrying the whispers of a lost civilization. Carter's squad stood motionless, weapons lowered but ready. The frail alien leader, still in shock, stared at them with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "You are human?" the alien asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carter nodded. "We got your distress signal. Who are you?" The alien hesitated, then straightened his back. "I am Valak, last counselor of the Zorkai." He gestured to the dozen survivors behind him. Weak, starving, clinging to life. "We are all that remains." A betrayal revealed. Carter's heart sank. An entire species, reduced to this. "What happened here?" he asked. Valak's expression darkened. "We were once part of the Galactic Council, allies to many, until we were deemed unworthy." Sergeant Blake frowned. "Unworthy? What does that mean?" Valak's fists clenched. "Our homeworld was rich in Tulsar crystals, a rare energy source. The Council wanted it, but instead of trade, they chose conquest." Carter exchanged glances with his team. This wasn't just abandonment. This was extermination. "The fleet came," Valak continued. "They burned our cities, poisoned our skies, and declared us extinct. Those who escaped were hunted. We sent out thousands of distress calls." His eyes met Carter's. "Only you answered." "The galaxy's dirty secret," Captain Reynolds' voice crackled through Carter's earpiece. "Carter, we're picking up residual energy signatures. Someone wiped this place clean. But it wasn't long ago." Carter turned back to Valak. "You said they hunted survivors. Are they still coming?" Valak's gaze dropped. "We don't know, but if they discover that you are here." A deep, distant hum cut through the silence. Riley's voice came through the comms. Carter, we've got movement in orbit. Unidentified ships. Big ones." Carter's pulse quickened. They weren't alone anymore. Valak looked up, terror flashing across his face. "They found us." The war that wiped out the Zorkai might not be over yet. And now, humanity was part of it. A low rumble echoed through the ruined city as the sky darkened. Carter instinctively tightened his grip on his rifle. His squad stood frozen, listening to the distant hum of approaching ships. "They're here," Valak whispered, his voice filled with dread. Captain Reynolds' voice crackled through the comms. "Carter, 3 unidentified warships just dropped out of FTL. They're scanning the surface." Carter turned to Valak. "Who are they?" Valak's face was pale. "The K-Theri Dominion. The ones who betrayed us." Blake cursed. "Damn it. What do they want now?" "They already wiped you out." Valak shook his head. "They don't leave loose ends. If they know we're alive, they'll finish what they started." Carter exhaled sharply. "Not if we stop them first." Nowhere left to hide. A sudden explosion shook the ground, sending dust and debris into the air. The K-Theri had begun their bombardment. They're firing plasma rounds, Riley reported over comms. They're not even scanning for survivors. They're just erasing the city. Valak and his people huddled together, fear in their eyes. They had already lost their world once. Now it was happening again. Carter turned to Reynolds. "Captain, can we take those ships?" A pause. Then Reynolds replied, "The Sentinel can handle one, maybe two, but not all three. We need a plan." Carter glanced at Valak. "Any underground shelters?" Valak nodded. "An old resistance bunker beneath the city. It's not much, but it can shield us from orbital scans." Carter turned to his squad. "All right, we move. We'll get these people to cover while the Sentinel keeps them busy." The soldiers formed a perimeter around the Zorka survivors and started moving through the crumbling streets. Above, the sky glowed red with incoming fire. Time was running out. A desperate gamble. They reached the entrance of the bunker, an old steel hatch, half buried under rubble. Blake and Vasquez cleared the debris while Carter kept watch. Then, a roar filled the air. Carter turned sharply. In the distance, dark figures descended from the sky. Ferry shock troops, their sleek, black armor glinting in the firelight. "They're deploying ground forces," Riley shouted. Carter's blood ran cold. They weren't just here to finish the job. They were here to make sure no one lived to tell the truth. The sky burned red as the K-Ferry warships intensified their bombardment. Buildings collapsed, and fire spread through the ruins like a hungry beast. The ground trembled beneath Carter's feet. "Move. Get them inside." He barked, waving the Zorka survivors toward the bunker hatch. Blake and Vasquez pulled the steel door open as Valak and his people hurried below. The air filled with the sound of plasma fire, echoing between the shattered buildings. Then, the shadows moved. Carter turned just in time to see the first K-Ferry shock troopers land. Their sleek black armor gleamed under the firelit sky, and their glowing red visors locked onto their targets. They weren't here for prisoners. The fight begins. The first plasma bolt streaked through the air. Carter barely dodged as it melted a chunk of concrete beside him. "Contact. Engage," he shouted. Blake, Riley, and Vasquez opened fire, their rifles lighting up the darkness. The Cathari were fast, inhumanly fast. But the humans fought harder. One enemy vaulted over rubble, aiming straight for Vasquez. She rolled aside and fired, sending a burst of kinetic rounds into its chest. The alien staggered, then collapsed. More Cathari dropped from the sky. Too many. Carter gritted his teeth. They had to hold the line, just a little longer. A desperate plan. "Captain, we're getting swarmed down here," Carter yelled into his comms. Reynolds' voice came through, calm but tense. "I see them. The Sentinel is inbound, but those warships are locking onto us. We won't last long." Carter's mind raced. 3 ships, too powerful to fight head-on. But what if? He turned to Valak. "You said the Cathari wiped you out for Telsar crystals, right?" Valak nodded, confusion on his face. "Yes. Why?" Carter smirked. "Because those crystals are unstable under the right conditions. If we overload them..." Valak's eyes widened. "You want to turn them into a bomb." Carter nodded. "Exactly." Valak hesitated, then gave a grim smile. "We have a cache beneath the bunker, enough to vaporize anything in a 50-mile radius." Carter turned to his team. "All right, new plan. We draw them in, plant the charges, and blow them straight to hell." Blake grinned. "Now that's my kind of plan." The Cathari were closing in fast, but if the humans could lure them in, then for the first time in history, the hunters would become the hunted. The ruins trembled as the K-Ferry warships hovered above, their cannons glowing with deadly energy. The night was alive with gunfire and explosions, the air thick with smoke and burning metal. Carter wiped the sweat from his forehead. "We don't have much time." Valak was already working on the Telsar crystal detonators, his hands moving quickly over the glowing blue minerals. "This will work," he muttered. "It has to." Blake reloaded his rifle, eyes scanning the battlefield. I hope you're right, because we just sent them an invitation to kill us all. And right on cue, the Cathari responded. The final assault. A deep roar shook the earth as a massive drop pod slammed into the ground, bursting open to reveal heavily armored Cathari enforcers. Their armor was bulkier than the shock troops, their weapons larger. They weren't here to fight. They were here to exterminate. Contact. Heavy units inbound. Riley shouted, firing the first shot. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds clashed in the air. The Cathari advanced with terrifying speed, their weapons tearing through cover. Blake tossed a grenade, sending 2 aliens flying. Carter ducked behind rubble, turning to Valek. How much longer? Valek wiped sweat from his brow. The charges are armed, but someone needs to manually detonate them. Carter's stomach dropped. No remote trigger. That meant someone had to stay behind. He looked at his squad. Blake, Vasquez, Riley. They had families back home. He looked at Valek, the last hope of his people. Carter exhaled. I'll do it. Valek's eyes widened. No, you can't. Carter smirked. I thought you said humans were reckless. Before Valek could argue, the Sentinel's engines roared overhead. Captain Reynolds' voice crackled through the comms. Carter, we can give you an exit, but you have to move. Now. Carter made his choice. The explosion that shook the stars. Everyone fall back. Carter ordered. His squad and the Zor-K rushed toward the extraction point as he stayed behind, holding the detonator. The Cathari commander stepped forward, his crimson eyes locking onto Carter. Foolish human, you think this will stop us? Carter grinned. No, but it'll slow you down. He pressed the trigger. A blinding white light swallowed the battlefield. The ground ruptured as the Tulsar crystals detonated in a chain reaction, unleashing an explosion that ripped through the Cathari forces. The shock waves sent their warships spiraling out of control, flames consuming the sky. Carter felt himself lifted off the ground, thrown backward as the world around him vanished into fire. Carter's ears rang with silence, his vision blurred as he slowly opened his eyes, the world around him nothing but fire and ruin. The Tulsar explosion had worked. The Cathari warships were falling from the sky, their twisted wreckage burning across the battlefield. The once powerful alien invaders were now nothing more than scattered embers. But Carter wasn't sure if he had survived the victory. Pain stabbed through his body as he tried to move. His armor was scorched, the visor of his helmet cracked. He coughed, tasting blood. The force of the explosion had thrown him far from the bunker, and now he lay among the ruins. Alone. Or so he thought. A friend's promise. A shadow moved in the smoke. Then another. Carter instinctively reached for his sidearm, but his fingers barely responded. Too weak, too hurt. Then a familiar voice cut through the haze. Carter. It was Valek, alive. Behind him, a small group of Zor-K survivors emerged from the wreckage. Their expressions were a mix of shock and awe. The battle was over, but Carter had paid the price. Valek knelt beside him. You insane, reckless human. His voice trembled. You saved us all. Carter chuckled, then winced in pain. That's what we do. The Sentinel hovered above, its floodlights cutting through the smoke. Reynolds and the team had returned. Blake and Vasquez rushed down from the ramp, lifting Carter onto a stretcher. Hang in there, man, Blake muttered. You're not dying today. Valek stepped forward. His people looked at Carter with reverence, the human who had risked everything for them. This debt cannot be repaid, Valek said. The Zor-K will never forget what you've done. Carter smirked, his voice weak but steady. Then don't forget who stood by you when the galaxy turned its back. Valek placed a hand over his heart, the Zor-K symbol of loyalty. Never. As the ship ascended, leaving the burning world behind, Carter allowed himself to close his eyes. The war was over. the Cathari had lost, and an abandoned alien race had found its saviors in humanity.